They say every family has its secrets. Mine just happened to explode one summer afternoon when everything seemed peaceful. You'd never guess looking at our family photos. Smiling faces, Sunday dinners, and birthday cakes. But beneath those well-framed moments was a history of resentment, betrayal, and silence that none of us dared to confront. I always thought my family was ordinary. Mom was the kind of woman who could whip up a meal from anything and still look like she had just walked out of a salon. Dad was the stoic type, the strong silent provider who built our house with his own hands and spent Sundays fixing things that didn't need fixing. I was the middle child, stuck between my perfect older sister and the charming youngest brother. We played our roles well. Too well, maybe. It all began to unravel the summer I turned 30. I had come back home after years of living in another city. My relationship had just ended. My job felt like a dead end, and I figured a couple of months in the countryside would help me clear my head. My parents welcomed me like they always did, with open arms and warm food. My sister, Mia, who still lived nearby, started dropping in more often. My brother, Leo, had recently moved back into the guest house after his own divorce. It felt like we were all being pulled back into the orbit of our childhood home. First, it was nice. Nostalgic, even. We'd sit on the porch sipping iced tea, watching the sunset, like we used to do. But then small things started to feel off. I noticed Mom would tense up every time Leo mentioned Dad. Mia seemed unusually cold during dinners, avoiding eye contact with both of them. And Dad. He had started spending more and more time in the garage, pretending to tinker with old tools he never used anymore. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. I found Mia sitting alone in the garden, cigarette in hand, even though she had supposedly quit years ago. I asked her what was going on, why everyone was acting so strange. She gave me a look I couldn't read, then exhaled slowly and said, "You really don't know, do you?" That was the first crack, the first drop of water behind the dam. And once it started leaking, there was no holding back the flood. It turned out that Dad had a child with another woman. Not just a fling, not just a mistake, but a full-on relationship that lasted years. The woman lived in the next town over. Her son, Dad's son, was just a year younger than Leo. Mom had known for over a decade. She had kept it a secret for the sake of the family, or so she said. Mia had found out accidentally, walking into an argument between our parents years ago. Leo only discovered the truth recently when he stumbled upon old letters hidden in the attic while moving back in. And me? I had been living my life, completely oblivious, thinking our family was untouched by scandal. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about every moment from my childhood. Every awkward silence. Every inexplicable argument. Every time Dad missed a birthday or came home late. It all started to make sense. And I felt a strange mixture of anger, confusion, and, oddly, relief. At least now I knew why things were the way they were. But here's the thing. Secrets like that don't stay quiet forever. The truth has a way of bubbling up, especially when the people who buried it start to lose control. And the more I started asking questions, the more I realized this was only the beginning. Have you ever uncovered a family secret that changed the way you saw everyone around you? Did it bring your family closer, or tear you further apart? Stick around, because what happened next, no one could have seen it coming. If this kind of story speaks to you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The next morning, I woke up to find the house unusually quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the eerie, heavy silence that feels like the air is thick with tension. I went downstairs expecting to see Mom making breakfast or Dad reading the newspaper, but the kitchen was empty. The smell of coffee was there, but it had long gone cold. It felt like I had slept through something important. I found Leo out back, sitting on the porch swing with a faraway look in his eyes. I sat beside him without saying anything. After a few moments, he said he had been thinking about reaching out to our half-brother. The words felt strange even as he said them, like we were trying to speak a new language for the first time. Part of me wanted to shut it down, to pretend like none of this had happened. But I couldn't. The truth was out, and it was shaping our reality whether we liked it or not. We started talking more openly after that. Leo told me he had confronted Dad about the letters. Apparently, Dad hadn't denied it. He just nodded, sat down and said, "It was a different time. That was all."
No επάλεγει. No explanation.
Just a tired phrase that did nothing to soothe the wound. Leo had walked out of the room and hadn't talked to him since. Mia, on the other hand, was furious. She had carried this knowledge alone for years, resenting our silence, even though we didn't know. She admitted that it had changed the way she saw our parents, especially Mom. For her, the betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, but in the decision to keep it secret. She felt like Mom had chosen denial over honesty, and that choice had tainted everything else. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly strained. We'd eat meals together, but the conversation was hollow. Dad kept himself busy outside. Mom hovered, trying too hard to pretend everything was normal. I tried to mediate, but it was like trying to hold smoke in my hands. Then one afternoon, a car pulled into our driveway. It was an old sedan, dusty and unfamiliar. A man stepped out. He was tall, lean, with eyes that looked a lot like Leo's. My heart stopped. I knew immediately who he was, even before he introduced himself. His name was Daniel, our brother. He had received a letter from Dad a few weeks prior. It wasn't detailed, just a few lines saying it was time they met, and if he wanted, he could stop by. Daniel said he had debated coming. He didn't want to stir up anything, but in the end, curiosity won. We stood there awkwardly on the porch, unsure of what to say. Mom came out, her face pale, hands wringing her apron. Leo looked like he might punch someone. Mia was nowhere to be seen. I stepped forward and held out my hand. Daniel took it. His grip was firm but uncertain. He looked around at all of us and said, "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to know who I am." There was a long pause. Then Mom spoke, her voice shaking. "Your family." It was such a simple phrase, but it landed like a stone in still water. What would you do if someone you didn't know suddenly walked into your life claiming to be your sibling? Would you open the door or close it forever? Let me know what you'd feel in a moment like that. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Daniel didn't stay long that day, just an hour or two. Enough time to sit awkwardly in the living room, sip lukewarm tea, and answer a few basic questions. It was obvious he was just as unsure as we were, but I admired the calm way he handled everything. He wasn't angry, at least not outwardly. Mostly he seemed curious, like someone trying to fill in the blank spaces on a puzzle he didn't realize was missing pieces until now. Leo kept his distance, arms folded across his chest like a shield. He didn't say much. I could feel the storm brewing in him, but for once he kept it in. Mia never came out. Later, I found out she had been watching from the upstairs window the whole time, silently smoking, trying to decide whether she even wanted to acknowledge his presence. When Daniel finally stood up to leave, he thanked Mom. She just nodded, her lips tight. Then he looked at me and said, "I don't know what comes next, but I'm glad I came." After the door closed behind him, we all just stood there in silence. You'd think the hard part would be over after the secret came out, but that's the thing about truth. It doesn't clean up the mess it makes. That night, I found Dad sitting alone on the porch. It was the first time we were alone since I learned everything. He looked older somehow, like carrying that secret all these years had physically weighed him down. He didn't look at me as I sat next to him, just kept staring into the dark. I asked him if he had ever planned to tell us. He paused for a long time, then said no. He said he thought keeping it hidden would protect us, that it would keep our family intact. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I told him the truth didn't destroy us. The lie did. The next few days passed in a strange kind of limbo. No one knew how to act. It was like we were all extras in someone else's play, reading lines we didn't understand. But slowly, things began to shift. Mia came over one evening and asked if I wanted to take a walk. We ended up walking for over an hour, not saying much, just moving side by side like we used to as kids. Finally, she asked me if I thought we could ever forgive them, Mom and Dad. I told her forgiveness wasn't a switch you flip. It's a process, and maybe it starts with trying. Leo, surprisingly, was the first to reach out to Daniel. He didn't tell anyone, just drove over one day and showed up at Daniel's place. They went for a drink, talked for a couple of hours. When he came back, he didn't say much. Just that Daniel wasn't who he expected. And that maybe they'd meet again. Mom started going through old photo albums. She said she wanted to make space for new ones. I think that was her way of saying she was ready to stop living in the shadow of the past. Or at least try. As for me, I began to write everything down. Every detail, every feeling, every shift in the atmosphere of our home. I didn't know if it would become anything, but it felt like the only way I could make sense of what had happened. Have you ever felt like your entire life was written in one language, only to discover there's another you never learned? One that changes everything? Let me know how you'd react to a revelation like this. Would you want to know the truth, no matter the cost? The end of summer brought with it a strange calm. The kind that settles over a place after a storm has ripped through and left everything still standing, but slightly crooked. That's how our family felt. Not broken, not destroyed, just altered. Nothing looked quite the same anymore, but we were still here. Daniel started coming around more often. At first, it was just casual. A quick coffee with Mom, dropping off a book for Leo, a short walk with me down to the creek where we used to play. But each time, the visits lasted a little longer. The conversations went a little deeper. He was careful, respectful of the space we all needed. But he wasn't going away, and that became something we started to count on. Mom became almost maternal with him. It was odd to watch, and at first it made me feel protective, even a bit jealous, like he was taking a seat at the table that didn't belong to him. But then I realized she was trying to make up for time she never got to have. And maybe part of her was healing, too. Dad, though, remained mostly silent. He and Daniel exchanged a few words here and there, but it was strained. Sometimes I'd catch him watching Daniel when he thought no one noticed, a mixture of pride and regret written all over his face. But he never said much, and Daniel never pushed. Leo and Daniel surprised us all by going on a weekend fishing trip. It wasn't something they planned publicly. They just packed up the truck and left. When they came back, they didn't talk about what was said, but there was something lighter in Leo's eyes, something settled, like he had finally allowed himself to let go of the anger he'd been holding for so long. Mia took the longest. She avoided Daniel for weeks. Every time he was around, she found a reason to be elsewhere. I didn't push her. I knew her relationship with Dad had always been the most complicated. She had been the one to help Mom hold everything together all those years, the one who cleaned up the emotional messes without ever being asked. She had every right to be cautious. But one evening, I saw them talking quietly in the garden. Just the two of them. No raised voices.
No tears.
Just calm, measured words and the occasional nod. I don't know what was said, but after that night, she stopped disappearing when Daniel visited. I think we all started to realize that family isn't about blood or names or holiday dinners. It's about the people who show up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. One afternoon, I asked Daniel what he wanted out of all of this. He looked at me and said, "I want to belong somewhere." That hit me harder than I expected. Because underneath all the confusion and pain and surprise, that was what we all wanted, wasn't it? To belong, to be seen, to feel like we mattered. Can a family built on half-truths ever become whole again? Or do we just learn to live with the cracks, the missing pages, the forgotten corners? Let me know what you think. What would belonging look like for you after everything? Fall crept in slowly that year, like the season didn't want to disturb whatever fragile peace we had built over the summer. The leaves changed color, the air turned crisp, and for the first time in a long time, our family found a rhythm again. Not the old one, that was gone, but something new, uneven, uncertain, but real. Mom started baking again. She said the kitchen was the only place where things made sense. Every recipe had a beginning, a middle, and an end. Unlike the mess we'd been navigating, her pies became something of a ritual. We'd gather in the kitchen, peeling apples, kneading dough, sharing silence, and sometimes stories. Daniel became a fixture in those moments. He didn't try to force his way in, but we made room. He helped with the dishes, chopped vegetables, asked questions about our childhood. He wanted to understand not just who we were now, but who we had been before he knew us. One night, as we all sat around the table, he told us a story about his childhood. How he used to imagine what it would be like to have siblings. He'd make up names, invent conversations, pretend there were people waiting for him when he got home from school. It wasn't a sad story, just honest. But it landed heavily, and for a few minutes, no one said anything. Eventually, Mia reached over and refilled his glass of cider. That small gesture felt louder than words. Dad remained the quiet center of it all. He still didn't talk much to Daniel, but he started showing up more at dinner, on walks, during Sunday morning coffee. One afternoon, I caught them both outside, standing near the old shed. They weren't speaking, but they weren't avoiding each other either. Just standing in the quiet, breathing the same autumn air. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start. Leo surprised everyone by inviting Daniel to help with the renovation of the guest house. It had become his own little project since moving back, but for the first time he let someone in. They spent days hammering, painting, fixing things. Leo didn't say much about it, but he stopped calling Daniel the visitor and started calling him by name. As for me, I kept writing. I wrote about the way Daniel smiled when he didn't know anyone was watching. I wrote about the quiet strength in Mom's hands as she rolled out pie dough. I wrote about the sound of leaves crunching underfoot as we walked familiar paths with unfamiliar steps. And I wrote about the ache in my chest that hadn't quite gone away, but was starting to feel less sharp. Family, I realized, is not a picture you hang on the wall. It's a mosaic. Cracked tiles, mismatched colors, some pieces missing. But when you step back, it still tells a story. Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship from scratch? What does forgiveness look like in your life? I'd love to know, because sometimes healing begins in the stories we share. Winter arrived early that year. The first snow came before we had even raked all the leaves. Everything looked quiet, soft, like the world itself was holding its breath. Inside the house, though, things were starting to feel warmer in spite of the cold. The holidays were approaching, and with them came the question of tradition. For as long as I could remember, Christmas had been a tightly choreographed event in our family. Certain foods, certain music, the same ornaments in the same places. But now, nothing felt routine anymore. We weren't the same people who had celebrated last year. Mom was the first to suggest something different. Instead of trying to recreate the past, she proposed we each bring something new to the celebration. A dish we'd never made before. A song we'd recently discovered. A story we'd never told. It was her way of saying, let's stop pretending. Let's be who we are now. We all agreed. Leo cooked a Moroccan stew he had learned to make during a trip years ago. Mia brought a jazz record she said reminded her of the nights she used to dream of living in New York. Daniel made a dish from his mother's side of the family. A spicy corn casserole that none of us had ever tasted before, but which quickly disappeared from the table. Dad surprised everyone by pulling out an old guitar and playing a few songs. We didn't even know he remembered how. He didn't sing, just played, his fingers slow and deliberate on the strings. For a few minutes, we all just sat and listened. It felt like a bridge being built. Not all the way across, but far enough to meet someone in the middle. Later that night, we sat by the fireplace, the room glowing with a kind of peace we hadn't known in years. Mom told a story about her childhood Christmases, how she and her sister used to sneak cookies from the cooling rack and blame the dog. We all laughed, even Dad. Daniel looked around the room, and I saw something shift in his face. Not relief exactly, maybe recognition, like he had found something he didn't know he was looking for. Not perfection, but place. Not answers, but acceptance. It's funny how holidays can be both the hardest and most healing time. The contrast between who we were and who we've become is clearer under twinkling lights. And yet, sometimes it's during those moments, wrapped in old blankets and new beginnings, that we truly see each other. Can you relate to a holiday that changed everything for your family? Did it bring you together or drive you apart? Let me know. These are the moments that define us, after all. January always feels like a breath held too long. The decorations came down, the lights were packed away, and what was left behind was silence. Not an uncomfortable one this time, but something steadier. Like our home was finally starting to breathe again. Daniel called one afternoon and asked if I wanted to go for a drive. No destination in mind, just open roads and quiet company. We ended up on a hill outside town, one of those places where the wind feels different, where you can see everything but still feel far away from it all. He asked me if I thought we'd ever feel normal again. I told him I wasn't sure we ever were. Maybe normal was just the lie we all agreed to tell each other. What we had now was something else. Messier, sure, but more honest. He nodded and told me his mother had passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. He had been her only caregiver. He didn't say it for sympathy, just to explain. I could see the weight of those years in the way he looked out across the empty field. He had lived a different kind of life, one built on absence, on unspoken questions. Now he was slowly learning what it meant to share space with people who didn't owe him anything but were willing to offer something anyway. When we got home, Mom was making soup. She handed him a bowl without hesitation, like he had always been part of the rhythm. Dad didn't say much, just nodded at Daniel, who nodded back. That tiny exchange felt like a victory. Mia and Leo were doing better, too. They still had their hard days, we all did, but something about the honesty of it all seemed to soften the edges. We'd stopped pretending. That made all the difference. One evening, I came across an old journal in the attic. It was Dad's. Pages filled with notes, sketches, half-finished thoughts. I never knew he kept one. In it, I found a short entry dated the year Daniel was born. It read, "I made a choice and now I carry it. Every day. I hope one day they understand. I hope I do too. I didn't show it to anyone. Not yet. But reading it helped me see him differently. He wasn't just the man who had made a mistake. He was a man who had lived with its weight, who had chosen silence because he didn't know what else to do. Understanding doesn't erase pain, but sometimes it makes it easier to carry. Have you ever found something, a letter, a photo, a message, that changed the way you saw someone forever? Tell me about it. These quiet discoveries often speak the loudest. February thawed the snow just enough to remind us that spring was waiting. There was still cold in the air, but it didn't bite like it used to. It was softer now, the kind of chill you could walk through without flinching. And inside the house, things were finally beginning to settle into something that felt almost like peace. Daniel had started calling Dad more often. They didn't talk about the past, not directly, but they spoke about books, gardening, the weather. It was small talk, really. But sometimes small talk is the beginning of something big. You could see it in the way Dad listened. He wasn't just being polite. He was learning, trying. That was new. Mom, meanwhile, was organizing the basement. Not just cleaning, but sorting through years of stored-away memories. Boxes of toys, faded photographs, birthday cards. She called us all to help one weekend, and the project turned into a sort of family archaeology. Digging through the layers of who we'd been to make space for who we were becoming. Mia found an old drawing she had made in 2nd grade. A family portrait. There were 5 people in it, even though there were only 4 of us back then. She laughed when she saw it and said, "Maybe I always knew." We didn't say anything, just smiled and kept sorting. Leo uncovered a box of VHS tapes. Home movies from birthdays, holidays, lazy afternoons. We watched one that night, a grainy recording of a summer barbecue. Dad was behind the camera, narrating. Mom was grilling. Mia and I were chasing each other around the yard. And Leo, tiny and chubby-cheeked, kept trying to grab the hose. It was bittersweet. That version of us was gone. But watching it, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Gratitude. Not for the lie, but for the moments that were still real even inside it. The laughter, the warmth, the love that existed even in the shadow of things we didn't know. Daniel was quiet after the video ended. I asked him later what he thought. He said he didn't feel left out. He felt welcomed, like we were letting him inherit something sacred. That meant more than he could say. And maybe that's what families are in the end. Not perfect, not whole, not always fair, but open, willing to keep the door ajar for someone who knocks, even if they arrive late. Have you ever found a forgotten memory that made you see your past differently? Did it change how you felt about someone or yourself? Let me know. These rediscovered moments have a strange power, don't they? By March, the world outside was waking up. Buds appeared on the trees, the wind shifted from bitter to brisk, and the sun lingered just a little longer each evening. With the change in season came another shift, subtle but certain, in our home. We no longer tiptoed around each other. Conversations were easier, even when they brushed up against things that used to sting. There was a sense of honesty now, one we had earned through months of sitting in discomfort together. Daniel had taken up photography. He carried his camera almost everywhere, capturing small moments. Mom laughing at something Leo said, Dad trimming the hedge in quiet concentration, Mia reading in her favorite chair, me staring out the kitchen window, coffee in hand. He said it helped him feel connected, like he was building a visual map of this life he'd been invited into. One evening, he showed us some of his favorite photos. We gathered in the living room, passing the camera around like a secret. There were no grand portraits, just snippets of time. Smiles caught off guard, quiet glances, reflections in windows. And in every photo, there was a softness that made it clear he wasn't just observing. He belonged. Dad surprised everyone that night. After the slideshow, he stood up and said he wanted to talk. We all sat up a little straighter. He cleared his throat, looked at Daniel, then at the rest of us. He said he was sorry. Not in the vague, rehearsed way we had feared, but with specifics. He spoke about fear, about shame, about the years spent watching us grow up while carrying a truth he couldn't bear to speak. He said he knew he'd made choices that hurt us, and that no amount of regret could rewrite what had already been written. But he also said he was grateful. Grateful that we had chosen to stay, that we had made room, that we hadn't let the past define the future. No one spoke right away. Then Mom reached for his hand. Leo gave a small nod. Mia exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since childhood. And Daniel, he simply said, "Thank you." It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real. Afterward, we lingered in the room, not because we had anything left to say, but because it felt good to sit in the quiet, together. That was new and beautiful. Have you ever had a moment with your family where everything changed? Not because the past disappeared, but because someone finally spoke the truth? Tell me, those turning points stay with us, don't they? April arrived with rain. Soft at first, then persistent. It felt like the sky was rinsing everything clean. The dust of winter, the weight of unspoken truths, even the years we lost in silence. We were all different now. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just settled. Our edges had smoothed. The sharpness that once defined us had softened into something more forgiving. That's what time and truth can do, if you let them. Daniel was officially moving to town. He found a small house nearby, nothing fancy, but close enough to walk over for dinner or borrow a ladder. He said he didn't want to live in the past, but he did want to be near the people who helped shape his future. That felt like a kind of arrival none of us had the words for, so we marked it the way we knew best, with food and stories. One Sunday, we had everyone over, even extended family, cousins who didn't know the full story, neighbors who had wondered for years why our porch light always seemed to flicker a little too late at night. And yet, none of that mattered anymore. We laughed, we ate, we passed dishes down a table that had somehow gotten longer over the months. At one point, Mom stood up and raised a glass. Her voice was steady. She didn't give a speech, just said she was proud of how far we'd come, that we had learned to live with the cracks, that sometimes the best stories are the ones that change shape as you live them. After everyone left, I stayed behind to help clean up. Daniel was in the kitchen loading dishes. He looked over and asked if I'd keep writing. I told him I didn't think I could stop. There was still more to say, not about the past, but about what came after. Because the story doesn't end when the truth comes out. That's just where it begins. So, if you're listening to this and you've uncovered something in your own life that rattled the walls of what you thought you knew, take heart. Truth hurts, but it also heals. And even in the messiest of families, there's room for grace. What would you do if you had the chance to rewrite your family story? Not to erase the past, but to honor it, learn from it, and move forward stronger. Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story too. And remember, This story is voiced by artificial intelligence. Mistakes may happen, so if you spot anything off, feel free to call it out below so we can make it better for you.